Welcome and thank you all. My name is Melissa, and welcome to Garbage is a State of Mind, the keynote address for the Students for Zero Waste 2018. So I guess that means you're all in the right place, right? So if you're not, you can leave now or just stay, okay? First of all, I want to thank all of the people and organizations who've supported me on my journey to this space in this moment. Chris Kane and all of the staff at Plan for taking such good care of me always. I have deep gratitude for their work and for their commitment. I want to thank my family, both at home and my partner and our children who are here today with me. I want to thank the ancestors who've stewarded these lands for millennia and whose descendants are still in the struggle and inspire my work. And I want to thank all of you for being here today. So, let's get to this slideshow. Oh, and here are also some logos of some organizations that I look to in my work, that we ally with and partner with. Ironbound Community Corporation is the organization that I work for in Newark, New Jersey. Sorry. So, yes, so consider for a moment, waste and garbage as we traditionally think of it as some unwanted stuff that we throw away when we're done with it. And once it leaves our hands, traditionally we don't think about it again, unless we wish we hadn't thrown it out for some reason. So garbage in that sense also has something that might be opposite to it. So I'm wondering if you think about garbage in the sense of, the traditional sense, just stuff we throw out and don't think of it again. Can anyone just yell out something that would be like opposite of garbage in that sense? Any brave souls? I heard compost, treasure, resource. Sorry? Tools, buildings, all great answers. Exactly, things that we would want, that we'd want to have, that we would think that we needed. So, consider for a moment that rather than, a thing, that waste could be a way of thinking. And not just any way of thinking, but a way of thinking that actually disempowers us and blocks people from taking the action that they need to take to improve themselves and their environment. That's my definition of waste. I'm sure I'm not the first person to think of it that way. But for me, the worst kind of waste is really wasted potential. And by potential, I mean human potential. Because we all have the capacity to make a positive change in our own lives and the lives of others. And the worst type of waste is, a person, an individual who doesn't know or understand that. So in that sense, I think that there's also an opposite to waste, by that definition. Waste is a waste of potential. So if we think about waste as a waste of potential, can anyone name some opposites to that?
An opportunity.
Opportunity. Community, productivity, collaboration. This side over here is awfully silent. Income. Growth. These are great answers, things that we need clearly, to thrive as human beings. So for me, two of the things that I really drawn in this work and I think are the opposite of waste are hope and creativity. Because with hope and creativity, we can really turn just about anything into opportunity, into growth, into potential. So, over the course of this evening, I really hope to inspire and encourage you all to continue. And I say continue because if you're here, clearly you have taken a step in your life towards zero waste or towards activism. And I hope to inspire and encourage you all to continue to take these actions to move your communities and this country towards a more sane and sustainable way of being. You, as the expert in your own experiences, rooted in place and grounded in your own stories, Hopefully you will be able over the course of this weekend to find your own points of intervention in this crazy system. So basically, when we're thinking about waste and, waste as a category assigned to things, some things that I'd like you to think about, in this evening and over the course of the weekend if you're staying is, what is the meaning of waste and what is assigned to the category of waste? What kind of people, places, and things are considered disposable and throwaway? What is considered legally and socially acceptable to do with waste? And why is it, legally and socially acceptable to do certain things with waste and not other things? Where does waste go physically, and why does it go there? And what are the alternatives to that system, and how do we get there? I don't see anybody taking notes. There will be a quiz on this later. Wow, it's a tough audience. Come on, it's Friday night. You could be anywhere. You chose to be here. So please, enjoy yourselves. Okay, so, I want to start by just jumping right in and asking you all to participate, because I'm that kind of person. And I have a discussion question. So before we get into the question, I would like for you to think about this question and then turn to a person next to you, introduce yourself if you don't know them, and I'd like you to answer this question for each other. When have you felt hopeless or powerless to change a situation? How did you shape this feeling? Or what do you think is the best way to overcome feeling powerless or hopeless? So kind of asking you to get a little vulnerable with your neighbor at 6 something in the evening on Friday. But I think that this exercise is really important because it's kind of the first step in what we want our end goal to be here. So if you would just take 2 minutes to introduce yourself to a neighbor and answer these questions for each other, I'd be really grateful. Thank you so much. And go. So I'd like to move now into a quote that really, that really sort of grounds me in my work. And it's by my mentor, Dr. Daisaku Ikeda. And it says, "A great human revolution in just a single individual will help achieve a change in the destiny of a nation, and further will enable a change in the destiny of all humankind." Human revolution, in other words, refers to raising one's gaze beyond one's restricted, ordinary, everyday world and striving for and dedicating oneself to achieving something more lofty, more profound, and all-embracing. So one of the first things that I want to ground us in is a structure that's called just transition. How many of you all have heard of just transition in some form or another? So this diagram here, you can actually Google if you want to see a less pixelated version of it. And it's actually based in the indigenous principles of just transition. And so this is sort of the grounding basis for our whole, belief in both climate justice, environmental justice, is that another world is possible. And so, understanding that the world that we live in now is based in consumerism, extraction, enclosure of wealth, militarism, where individuals often feel like cogs in a wheel. We're looking for a transition that doesn't only involve the environment, right? That's what we call environmentalism. We're not environmentalists, we fight for environmental justice. Because the justice principle is what acknowledges that we live in a system that's inherently unjust. Moving us towards a living economy, one where people really feel, at one with themselves, with each other, and with nature. So that's sort of the basis, of our work. So this is a nice little diagram that I'm sure you've all seen, and I like that it, to juxtapose it with the just transition, because it too talks about basically a different vision. This one is a different vision of what we can be doing with waste, and it it's all about, you know, the whole linear cycle of consumption. We'll come back to this one. So here's the linear consumption model. Extraction. Oh, how many people have seen this? Just out of curiosity. Okay, so yeah. So you all are really familiar with this. But then, you know, how many of you are familiar with this? So obviously, you know, the folks at Plan, while looking at ways to intervene and interrupt the linear consumption model, came up with their own ideas of how to interrupt. So at the point of extraction, you see resistance. At the point of production, you see redesign, and, you know, so all throughout this cycle, you see alternatives for what can happen to waste. And I would dare say that there are many, many more. And so, you know, movements like ours really require the creativity and ingenuity of many, many people. In whatever field you're in, whatever line of work you're in, whatever your interest is, I'm pretty sure that there's somewhere along this cycle that you could see yourself intervening in this particular story. So, just a little bit about how I ended up in here, and then we'll come to my community. So, my personal story, as you know, my name is Melissa. I live in Newark, but I was born in the Bronx, uptown. Yeah, I don't know about that, okay. Yes, so I live in Newark. I've been living for about 15 years. And like I said, I grew up in the Bronx pre-Giuliani. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with New York, but Rudolph Giuliani, when he became mayor, you know, we saw a significant shift in the quality of life for poor people and people of color in New York. In some regards, you know, New York became safer, it became cleaner, but it also became Disneyfied. It gentrified very rapidly after Giuliani came into office. And so I got to see firsthand what a city looks like when it, you know, goes from, you know, inner city, urban, largely people of color, to almost completely gentrified. When I walk through New York now, I don't imagine how so many rich people could live in one place, but then I found out that that's just where rich people park their money, so that's another thing. So, you know, I really got to see that firsthand. And when I moved to Newark, you know, I didn't imagine that I would be seeing Newark go through some of the same changes. The only difference is that, you know, because of strong grassroots organizing in Newark, you know, we saw the trend coming, and we've been able to put many things into place that are making it so that people, as the city changes, the people who live there now will be able to continue to afford to live there. What does that have to do with waste? What does that have to do with environmental justice? Well, everything, right? Because as we improve our communities, green our communities, make our communities safe and great places to live, we want to be able to continue to live there after the changes happen. And as we've seen in other communities, the greener your community becomes, unfortunately, the more likely it is that, you know, wealthier people are going to want to live there, that developers and speculators are going to be there next. So that's something that we marry with our environmental and our climate justice work, is that the people who live there now and are doing the fighting to improve their community deserve to stay. I think that deserves a round of applause. So the way that I got involved in this work is, you know, I was in early childhood education, out of school time education, and one day it just dawned on me that, you know, with everything going on in the world, that, you know, the ability of young people of color to go to college might become a moot point. And so I started to think to myself, what are the bigger systems that I needed to challenge in order to ensure that young people in the future would be able to just go to school freely and things like that. And I ended up in this kind of work by accident. I lived in the Ironbound neighborhood of Newark for about 10 years before I really even knew of the environmental crisis that was happening right in on my own streets. And it happened because the Ironbound Community Corporation, where I work, has many grassroots organizers who would invite me out to things. They'd invite me to hearings. Eventually I started to do some neighborhood mapping and air monitoring, pushing my kids in the stroller with me. It was something that I could do as a stay-at-home mom, and so I did it. and I just became increasingly involved and aware. But I didn't really become an activist until, my 1-year-old son was diagnosed with asthma. Now, no other child in my family had had asthma until that point. He was the first one to be diagnosed with asthma. The second was my niece, who lived right across the street from us. They're still the only 2 kids in my family with asthma. And what I understood by the time he was diagnosed was that I lived in a community with a disproportionate amount of air pollution due to a few different factors, most of them being in industries that were less than a mile or 2 away from our homes. Some of those industries are, well, you'll see them in the slides, but that was my entrance point. I had to actually be personally impacted, in order to really see the necessity for me to stand up where I lived. And then also understanding that as a woman, as a person of color, as a working class person, pretty much anywhere I try to live is going to look the same way. The number one determinant of whether or not you live around environmental pollution is your race. It's the number one. And the second is your economic status. So yes, the poorest white people in this country have some of the most egregious pollution. Those are people in Appalachia who are dealing with coal. And I have many allies who are in that struggle. Besides for that, if you are black and brown, chances are, even if you're wealthy, you live near to some form of pollution, either ground or air or water, all 3 of which are in Newark and the Ironbound. So that's how I got involved. And actually after doing the community work, I started getting job descriptions for organizer, and I was like, oh, okay, and I just would send it to other people. But as I really looked deeply into what organizing is about, I found that it's definitely, the way that we will build power. So, as I mentioned, the community that I come from is the Ironbound community in Newark. As you saw on that first map, Newark is actually Lenni Lenape land. Lenni Lenape people were living peacefully along the Passaic. And that river now, will not be swimmable for many generations because it's the largest Superfund site in the country. It's contaminated with dioxin, which is a byproduct of Agent Orange, which was a defoliant used during the Vietnam War. It was produced on the banks of the Passaic, and the byproduct dioxin was dumped directly in the Passaic and was found throughout the Ironbound neighborhood by the EPA about 30 years ago. Which was what alerted authorities to the fact that it was such a huge problem. So, the Ironbound actually is a site of a lot of things like that. This is Penn Station, and so the Ironbound is about 4 square miles of Newark, and it has a pretty hefty chunk of the region's energy infrastructure, waste infrastructure, and the port of Newark in New Jersey. So you can see port containers all around the place. That on the right is paper recycling. So, as you use that paper, you put it in the recycling bin, it may look neat and clean on that end, but by the time it gets to Newark, this is what it looks like. We have metal recycling, and those are some trucks literally across the street are residential homes from facilities that look like this. And then, of course, there are the trucks that come through our neighborhood, hundreds in an hour on certain corners. Some of them are container trucks coming from the port. Others are waste trucks or construction trucks that are coming from the port. So another thing, before we get to that, so, these are just a few of the environmental justice issues that we deal with in the Ironbound. We also have probably about 100 brownfields. Not sure how much you all know about, environmental issues, but, it's a place that, basically you would think, why would anyone want to live there? And the simple fact is because we love our community. We love the diversity of our community. We love where we live. We are very much rooted in place. And because actually we are doing amazing things there, right? So, but you wouldn't know it if you just took the outside look. When you hear about Newark on the news, what you probably hear is violence, drugs, police, gangs, and then here I am now telling you, on top of all that, we're an environmental justice community of concern as designated by the EPA. You know, so when you hear all that, I'm sure a lot more comes to your mind. But I'd like to take another moment, you know, to bring us back to the way we think about people and things with our next questions for conversation. So actually, this is just something to think about, right? So think about something you've been taught or recently heard about poor people, about people who are or were in jail, undocumented people, and people who receive public assistance. So as you hear and think about these things, you know, I'm pretty sure that, you know, unless you have done an immense amount of work around decarceration and, you know, anti-colonial mindsets, you know, the first things you think about are probably negative. Because that's what we're taught, that's what the media shows, you know, that basically if you're poor, if you are in jail, you know, you're not quite as much of a person as people who are wealthy, as people who are well educated, as people who are documented in this country. You know, there is a clear distinction that is constantly being drawn between who is worthy and who is not. And that goes into the area of environment, right? There's a distinction drawn between who is worthy to live in a place that is clean and has clean air and clean water, and who doesn't deserve that. And it's clear by the policies and by the citing of environmentally hazardous facilities. So, that being said, you know, back to, you know, why would anyone want to live in a place like Newark? Well, because Newark makes activists out of us. And activists are the people who are going to change these situations, right? Because we live in such a situation, you know, we learn to do for ourselves. So here is a picture of this on the left is one of the housing projects in Newark. We planted flowers just this summer. We have an urban farm called Down Bottom Farms. We have local businesses like a beekeeper that comes and basically, you know, this is a Newark-based beekeeper that we work in conjunction with. We grow our own herbs and food. Mainly young people cultivate the land, they plant, they harvest. You know, we are not at all helpless despite the situation. We do a lot of work in the community. We make sure that despite the fact that we live in what's referred to as a food desert, that there's fresh produce available almost year-round through our programs. We work with local farmers over the food bank. We raise chickens, we eat together, you know, so we have created immense value out of this situation. And in addition to the groundwork we do, you know, we're also involved in municipal, state, and federal policy making, right? So this is a small grassroots organization in Newark that's having this kind of impact, both in the community, locally, you know, and in the state and nationally through the alliances that we're a part of. So, you know, what I would like, you know, you all to think about is, you know, what are the resources that you have at your disposal that would allow your voice to be magnified, your cause to be magnified, right? So alone, these things, you know, these issues really seem overwhelming. You know, when I think about the incinerator, you know, that has been burning trash in our community for almost 30 years. You know, alone at the beginning of the year, it seemed like an impossible thing to tackle. But through many alliances and a lot of intention, you know, we found that people are just standing up all over the place, you know, to as allies in our struggle to stop trash from being burned in our community. And, you know, why wouldn't we want trash to be burned in our community? It's a question that people ask, you know, really, particularly people who burn trash. So that's our incinerator, isn't it sexy? This is a Covanta facility, and some of you may be familiar with Covanta because they also have an incinerator in Chester. And if you're here for the week, you'll be able to meet activists from Chester who have been fighting incineration as well.
Is it waste to energy?
asked that question? Yeah, so waste to energy is what Covanta bills itself as. That's one of the many fibs it tells about itself. So, I mean, waste to energy is really a glorified way of saying burning trash. So this facility, another very pixelated picture, that's what it looks like on the inside. That's all trash. It's really not sexy. It's actually quite antiquated. There's like 1 or 2 people looking at tons and tons of trash to try to pick out things that shouldn't be burned. And trust me, there's a lot in there that shouldn't be burned at any given moment. So here's what we're talking about where this waste to energy fib comes in. So if these are CO2 emissions by energy source. So we know CO2 is basically, you know, what's driving climate change. This is not even all the co-pollutants, the lead, the mercury, the dioxin. This is just CO2. And we see that compared to other sources of energy, incineration is extremely dirty. It's extremely polluting. So, you know, this is pretty much the last thing we should be looking to for energy is incineration. But it's a way for them to earn like energy credits in different states' portfolios, including New Jersey. It's also a way for them to sort of greenwash themselves. So it benefits them to have this waste to energy, you know, moniker by their name. We're gonna have Q&A later, just so you know. Okay, and then here are some of the widely known incinerator pollutants, dioxins, PCBs, cadmium, arsenic, chromium. Oh, and I do need to thank folks from Gaia, the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives, because many of these slides came from them. Thank you, Gaia. Mercury, lead, acidic gases, particulate matter, PM, nasty stuff, PM. It comes in small and even smaller. So the smallest is 2.5, the smallest that they measure. Measure for PM is 2.5, and that stuff is so small that when you breathe it in, it goes directly into your lungs. And you know, once this stuff is in your body, good luck getting it out. So, you know, the kids who grow up around these things, they're literally gonna go into it, they're gonna live their whole lives with this barrage of chemicals in their blood and in their bodies. So, you know, waste incineration is just basically not really worth the money that it costs to open a facility, to run a facility. You know, cities have to pay to even burn their trash in these facilities, although they may get some kind of kickbacks. And worst of all is that incinerators must have trash to survive. So cities have to produce trash in order to maintain incinerators. Okay, sorry. Go back. So, you know, all of that, why would anyone want an incinerator? You know, why would anyone even consider an incinerator good business? Well, again, it's because of the fibs. So let's just watch the fibs in action. Okay. So, right. I mean, every time I watch that, I laugh a little harder. So, this is what we call in this work a false solution. We call it a false solution because it sets itself up as a solution to, you know, waste, as a solution to climate change. You know, it produces less gases than landfills, right? But nowhere does it take into account, you know, the impact that it itself has on the communities closest to it. It doesn't do anything to destabilize systems of inequity that mean, you know, that basically place in sight facilities like this in poor, working class, and neighborhoods of color, right? Doesn't question any of that. We call those false solutions. Real solutions to the crisis that we find ourselves in with the environment will always take those things into account. Not only that, but they come from the ground up. Anything that keeps power and wealth concentrated in the hands of a few is a false solution. So this is definitely one of them. But also for some other reasons, right? So it sets up a dynamic between incinerators and landfills as if those are the only two options for waste. Never does this call into question the production of waste. Why are we making so much waste, right? It assumes that you have to have waste. That even after you recycle and, and places where this incinerator exists, a lot of the times aren't even diverting, because once again, these things need a lot of trash to survive, right? They have to find trash all over the place to survive. Our incinerator gets trash from 20 municipalities in New York City to survive. When it was built, we were told that it was for Essex County alone, and we fought it. We fought it hard. It was a long fight. We've sued them at least twice. But, this was the lie that was told at the beginning, and now it's getting trash from all over the place because incinerators need a lot of trash to survive. As a matter of fact, they want to burn even more trash now, but that's another story. So, it sets up a dynamic, between incinerators and landfills as if those are the only options, which we know is not true. It's essentially not true, that you can either landfill it or incinerate it. And so basically the presence of the incinerator in a community de-incentivizes the alternatives. It de-incentivizes vision, it de-incentivizes creativity, as to what can be done to minimize production of trash and minimize, trash going to a facility like this. These questions never have to be asked because this incinerator needs all that trash to survive. So there's a lot of issues with that, and this is one of the videos we love to show our young people, and we pick it apart because almost everything in it is some kind of weird illusion, especially the fact that the smokestack, there's no smoke coming out of it in this, illustration, nothing coming out of it, and there are no homes around it, right? The homes are far away, and the people with their trash that magically disappears, that would be like the suburbs around Newark. Their trash magically disappears, and then poof, it materializes at Covanta, where it gets burned so that they can get energy. It's all a big farce. Yes, so many farces, many fibs like this are told so that people don't vision an alternative. But that's what we're here this weekend to do. We're here to talk about and uplift alternatives to these dirty systems. More false solutions. So this is New York City's sanitation page, and it talks about zero waste to landfills by 2030. And this is another way that we teach our young people to read between the lines. So what does this mean for Newark? When we get 10% of their trash, 500,000 tons a year, when they say zero waste to landfill, does that mean more waste to Covanta? Quite possibly. Do you think that they've called anyone in Newark to the table to talk about this plan? Not likely. I didn't get a call. So, just to review for those of you who are like, zero waste, what is she talking about? Okay, so we haven't talked so much about zero waste, but zero waste is one of the visions that we are uplifting of, where we need to get as society in order not to burn. So premise, if a product cannot be reused, recycled, or composted, then it should not be produced. And then there are zero waste goals, right, that have to do with resource and toxicity and protecting resource and, ensuring that new systems are prioritizing the needs of workers, communities, and the environment. Very related to the just transition that we talked about a little earlier. Some of the benefits of zero waste. So, in the city of Newark the government is kind of as old as the city itself. It's a very old city, old infrastructure. Some of you might have been hearing just recently there's a New York Times article about lead in the water in Newark, an issue that, we've been aware of on the ground for quite some time. But it's sort of exploding on the national scene now. They've called us the Flint of the East Coast. So, we're talking, the government, unfortunately, the municipal government of our city still deals with a lot of old ideas about what should be done with waste. Ideas that come from the 1870s about, what is appropriate for waste and what's not appropriate. So even like municipal scale composting is not legal in our city. And so, when we approach the city now, we're talking about jobs. You know, Covanta employs like 3 people a shift. You know, we're talking about green jobs, we're talking about less pollution, we're talking about something that's inherently better for the community. And, you know, as you see in Newark, we get a lot of waste every day. You know, we have about 30 waste-related facilities in our city. Most of them are in the Ironbound. So, you know, we, in addition to the environmental justice issue, there are also many social issues in the city. And so, you know, a just transition looks to address systems of inequity. You know, so that means we're looking to address racism, mass incarceration, prejudice and police action against undocumented individuals, gentrification. All of that is basically, you know, part of our work. We are not single issue people, nor are we a single issue community. So, that all being said, thinking about trash. So, I know many of you are students. Some of you may live in the area and some of you perhaps don't. You know, maybe once your degree is finished, you'll be going on to another place. But, you know, there's some questions I'd like you to think about for now and for the future. And you're gonna have a chance to talk about it again with a new neighbor. And that question is, what happens to your trash when it leaves your hand? Where does it go? How does it get there? And where does it end up? So you might not know the answer to all of those questions, but just, you know, try it out. And just be as detailed as possible. So try to get into groups of 2 if you can, so that you have more time to talk. And I'll give you like a minute each and I'll time you. So, you know, that exercise was really to get you all just really thinking about, you know, where things go. And, you know, we've been talking a lot about trash and, you know, where it goes, how it impacts those who end up with it in their communities. And, you know, I just wanted to take a moment to also highlight some other communities because, you know, our work in environmental justice is really about, you know, being allies to other communities. You know, we are the opposite of NIMBY. So it's not that we don't want an incinerator in our backyard, we don't want an incinerator in anyone's backyard. So, you know, we really do our best to also uplift the struggles of other folks in other communities. Maybe some of you all are familiar with these communities, but, you know, wherever you're from, you know, you probably wouldn't have to go too far to find the community that, you know, hosts your waste when it gets thrown away. So this is a slide about Detroit incinerator emissions. This came from the East Michigan Environmental Action Council, or EMEAC. They do a lot of great work in Detroit around environmental justice. So, you know, again, you would think, when you have facilities that, you know, where folks are complaining, that are bringing in trucks, all of this trash, you know, where it costs the city to dispose of it, you know, dispose of their own waste in an incinerator that's on their land. You know, you wonder, you know, why do these things even exist? And again, it really goes back to laws from like the 1800s or 1900s in some certain cities about what could happen with waste and what was considered sanitary, you know. So in the case of Newark and New York, you know, there were times where people just dumped trash. And, you know, municipal governments, as they were forming, realized that it wasn't very sanitary for many reasons. Rodents were bred, the smells, the odors. But then there were also these informal economies that grew up around trash heaps. You know, pickers, farmers that would feed the refuse to their pigs or to their animals. So basically, you know, as the systems of trash were sort of formalized and, you know, brought under government control, the first people who were disenfranchised were, you know, the people who, you know, picked through trash or who used trash for certain purposes. And that is still the case in Newark, where, technically you're not supposed to pick through trash, even though, we see so many hundreds and hundreds of bottles, plastic bottles, rescued from, from the trash by trash pickers. And it's in fact quite a dignified profession. One thing that really struck me in the time that I've spent in the global South, particularly in Brazil, is that, glass bottles, like for beer and things like that, they're always recycled. They're never thrown away. And then cans, people don't even put cans in the garbage. That you can literally leave a can somewhere and someone will pick that can up within moments because it's money, right? It's considered a resource, like a valuable resource. Paper, cardboard, these are not things that you would ever see going into the waste stream in Brazil. You would never see things like that going into the waste stream. That is also the case with many things. Like I can uplift Brazil because I've just been there so many times, and I live with a Brazilian, and I live in a Brazilian community, and I've just seen with my own eyes, when there is necessity, people become very creative, right? So we just, in my mother-in-law's home, she has this blender that she's had for like 20 years. That blender conks out, she opens that blender up, she fixes it, right? So now in the States, we have fix-it movements. Like, this is the new thing, right? But even though, I have to applaud it, like, yeah, fix that, right? Like, why do we throw out so many things? This is an issue. The issue that we have created, we've made trash a thing that is acceptable. It is totally acceptable and expected that we're gonna use something one time and then throw it away. That is that kind of consumption is really at the core of the issue, right? Because these things come from somewhere. They're extracted somewhere, especially if it's plastic, right? And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but especially plastic, right? Which we know is a product of oil, which is extracted from the earth and, does terrible damage to ecosystems and cultures in the process. To be made into something that someone will use once. And so, these are while it is, part of it is individual responsibility, these things only change when movements happen. And movements are, nothing more than the conglomeration of many individuals, right? So just like drops in the ocean, we're all a drop. May just be a drop, but every drop is necessary, right? We don't get to an ocean unless every drop is there. So, we do need to have our own individual actions, but we also really need to be thinking how we can build power. Things only change when we change systems, right? It's not just about individual activity, it's about systemic change. Baltimore. So another Ally Energy Justice Network supplied me with this little slide here. So this is about Wheelabrator in Baltimore City, a very toxic facility. And for the most part, these facilities are really just a smack in the face to communities in which they're sited because we fight them. Our incinerator in Newark was a long battle. As a matter of fact, there was supposed to be, this was around the time that landfills were closing in New York. And we were going to get an incinerator in every county, in all of the 21 counties of New Jersey. But, this fight ensued that was based in Newark, in the Ironbound. The ironic part is that we got the incinerator. Only 3 incinerators were built at that time. One was built in the Ironbound, one was built not so far away in Rahway. And so it's kind of ironic that we fought, we protested, but we got it. But what we did was, in that fight, we made other incinerators afraid of us. So, that was not the only incinerator we fought. We fought an animal waste burning incinerator. We fought a medical waste burning incinerator. So, we learned how to fight and win. But, I think it's important always to uplift that these facilities don't come into, there's this kind of myth of like ignorant people who just didn't know any better. It's the exact opposite, right? We mobilized against the incinerator, and most communities do. but we are up against systems of inequality that say that you have to cite things like this in communities like ours. So, we never give up. We've had an incinerator in our community, like I said, for almost 30 years. We are a community that is a port-adjacent community, so, in addition to the incinerator and all of those air pollutants, we have all of the diesel from the trucks coming to and from the port, and all the port equipment, as well as the ships that are docked there. They're all burning diesel fuel. We also have 2 power plants that are also burning natural gas. So, the air quality, there's a reason why, when you drive into New Jersey, or Philadelphia for that matter, there's a smell that instantly assails you. How many of you know that smell? I smelled it today. When I come to Philly, this is the place that I feel, to me, is most similar to what I see when I go, when I get into Newark. It's industrial, there are train tracks, it's like, industry nestled with homes. And so, I think the important thing is to really, never stop fighting. Like, we will never give up. It doesn't matter. We will never stop. And B, find your allies, right? Because, no battle is won by one person alone. It does take a strong, committed group, to really keep the work going, but it really takes many allies, to win any of these fights. So, basically what we're talking about is the power of individuals, the power of you, to make a stand in your own life, to do something different. In essence, it's all about your individual resolve, right? Because so much is happening in the world right now that can serve to discourage people. You could look at this slideshow and say, wow, that's terrible, and you could feel discouraged. But every time I see it, it makes me even more, it fires me up even more to do more for my community. So in terms of your own individual action, it is important that you bring your bag when you go to the supermarket, and you have your water bottle, and some of you may even have those nifty little wooden forks and spoons that Plant sells. I have it. But that's not all, right? I was at an address recently, a keynote given by Annie Leonard, where she called those types of things just basic adult hygiene, and I loved it. It was like, bringing your bag and your bottle, basic adult hygiene. Like, yes, that's where we all need to be. At the same time, now we all know there are some days that our hygiene suffers, right? You're running late for class, or you're late for work, and maybe you don't brush your teeth that morning, or maybe you skip the shower and you just use that dry shampoo or whatever, right? That happens sometimes. And the same thing happens with our bottles and bags. Sometimes you just have to have that takeout. Like, no one's blaming you, right? No one is, we're not, at least in our movement, that's not the kind of stuff we're talking about. It's important, but what's important is the systematic change. And that only comes when we link up with others, right? So, what's important is that we find our squad. And it's really interesting because, just recently, there was this huge movement of youth, 50,000 youth gathered throughout the country for peace. It's called the 50K Lions of Justice Festival. And there was one in Newark, and Michelle Obama, former First Lady, gave the keynote address for that. And, in hearing about this movement of 50,000 youth, and that, it was basically a grassroots organizing effort, people talking to people about it. And, one of the premises was that, like, you would find your squad of 6, and you would take them to this festival for peace. And then, not too long after, Michelle Obama was quoted in terms of getting out the vote, telling young people to find their squads of 5, right? So this is an idea that is really catching on, find your squad. Who is your squad? Who are your 4 or 5 people that you can talk to about your own efforts, whether they be in waste, whether it be in energy, whatever it is, whatever your point of intervention is. Who are your folks? you know, that are going to support you in that and hold you accountable, and, you know, who you can basically, you know, start something with. And so I think that's, you know, something really important, is that you find those people, and then that you together, you know, can also find other people, right? So this is all about the power of grassroots. Really, you know, it's only, you know, small groups of people can maintain huge movements through their resolve, but, you know, you do need to find your resource. You know, so whether that be a student club, you know, Plan is definitely a resource. You know, I went to their website and found so many interesting things that I could use in our day-to-day struggles. We talked about the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives. There are other organizations that are both national and local, but find those organizations. You know, it's really important that you find the local group that's doing the work that speaks to your heart, and that you link up with them. You know, this is not the time to be a lone ranger. You know, we are all gonna need each other in these years to come. So yeah, so, you know, there's this, it's really interesting because, you know, there's something that my mentor says about, you know, good people who are doing wrong, you know, like people up to no good, have no trouble coming together to wreck other people's lives, right? And we see it all over the planet actually right now. You know, there's this rise of, you know, just folks who really are not about improving the human condition for all. And it's like they're working together really well to get the job done. But good people, on the other hand, because we're so standalone, you know, because we're so busy helping others and our families and our communities, we don't always make time to come together. We don't always have the time, but we have to. We absolutely must, you know, come together more than ever right now. We just don't have any more time. You know, the time for solo action really, you know, it's each individual, but we have to really, you know, use the power of our squads and our organizations, you know, to make the kind of change that we need. Because, you know, the cushion period, the window is closing. And I don't say that to discourage anyone, but really to encourage everyone to really walk away from here thinking, you know, like, what is my next step? You know, what's my point of intervention? So this is a quote from Dr. Wangari Maathai, the late Dr. Maathai. She says, it's very important for us to take action at the local level, because when we think of the globe problems, we get disempowered. But when we take action at the local level, we get empowered. We know that the little we are doing is making a positive change. If we can multiply that several million times, we can change the world, definitely. That's one that I just absolutely live by, and I think if it's, you know, really one thing that I hope that you can take away today is that it's really the local action that, you know, when we add it up, will count for the global win. Thank you.